We measure things by what we are. To the maggots in the cheese is the universe. To the worms in the corpse is the cosmos. How then can we be so cocksure about our world, just because of our telescopes, microscopes, and the splitting of the atom? No, science is but an organized system of ignorance. There are more things in heaven and on earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. What do we know about the beyond? Do we know what's behind the beyond? I'm afraid some of us hardly know what's beyond the behind. Creatures of twilight and delusion, we drift toward unknown ends. And that's why I feel the best thing is not to be born. But who is as lucky as that? To whom does it happen? Not to one among millions and millions of people. In these days of darkness and doubt, of crisis and confusion, what the world needs is a truly great soul. I am that soul. My name, as you may have guessed, is Theodore. I come from a strange stock. The numbers of my family are mostly epileptics, vegetarians, stutterers, triplets, nail biters. But I've always been happy. I was born of parents in one of the humble walks of life. My father was a manufacturer of dog oil, and my mother had a small studio where, for a reasonable fee, she disposed of other people's unwelcome babies. As a child, I learned rapidly. At the age of 6, my second novel had been published. Before I was 10, I could change my own diapers. By the time I was 11, I knew how to wave bye-bye. And in addition, even in those early days, I had my exact routine of duties. Not only did I have to assist my father in procuring dogs for his vats, but was also kept busy by my mother carrying away the debris of her work in the studio. My father had, as silent partners, all the physicians of the town. They rarely wrote a prescription which did not contain oleum canis. Oleum canis, oil of dog, was the little liver pill of its day. Everyone enjoyed the glorious, peppy feeling which goes with irregularity. One evening, I was passing my father's oil factory with the body of an infant from my mother's studio in my arms when I saw a policeman who seemed to be watching me closely. I didn't wish to get involved in a long discussion, and I avoided him by dodging into the oilery through a side door. My father had retired for the night. The only light in the place came from the furnace, which glowed a rich crimson under one of the vats. Within the cauldron, the oil still rolled in indolent heavings, pushing to the surface now and then a chunk of dog. It had been my habit to throw the dead baby bodies into the river, which wound its way idyllically through the village. But no, the policeman stood there and wouldn't move. Well, I finally said to myself, I guess it wouldn't greatly matter if I put this body into the cauldron. My father will know these bones here from the bones of a puppy, and the few deaths which might result from this new mixture, how important can they really be in a population which increases so rapidly? And laughing heartily, I flung the baby into the cauldron. Boys will be boys. The next morning, my father informed my mother and I that he had obtained the finest quality of oil he had ever manufactured. As usual, he had tested it first on himself, and the effect was simply terrific. But he had no idea how the result had been achieved. I deemed it my duty to explain. "Isn't he a darling, our son?" said my mother. so young and so promising. She tenderly kissed me, and my father couldn't help shedding tears of pride. But my parents were not the kind of people to be overpowered long by their emotions, and at once they took measures to exploit our new discovery. My mother moved her studio into a ring of the oilery, and my father discarded dogs altogether from his formula, although they still had an honorable place in the name of the product, Oleum canis, oil of dog. Finding a double profit in her business, my mother, God bless her, now devoted herself to it with new assiduity. Not only did she remove babies to order, but she also went out into the highways and byways, gathering in children of larger growth, and even such adults as she could lure to her studio. And Daddy, too, collecting for vats with diligence and zeal. The conversion of their neighbors into oil of dog had become the passion of their lives. What a way to make a buck. So enterprising had they now become that a public meeting was held and resolutions were adopted severely censuring them. It was intimated by the chairman that any further raids upon the population would be met in a spirit of hostility. My parents left the meeting broken-hearted, desperate, and I believe not altogether sane. Anyhow, I deemed it prudent not to enter the oilery. I slept outside. At about midnight, some impulse caused me to rise and peer through a keyhole into the furnace room, where I knew that my father now slept. The fires were burning as brightly as ever, and one of the large cauldrons was slowly, heavily bubbling. Boom, tsh, boom, tsh, boom, tsh, boom, tsh, boom, tsh. My father was not asleep. He had risen in his nightshirt and was stealthily approaching my mother's bedroom. Oil! Oil! Roar! But before he reached the door, it was opened slowly, noiselessly, and there stood my mother, white and silent in her nightgown, and she had in her hand the tool of her trade, a long, black hat pin. Oil! Oil! For an instant, my parents looked into each other's greedy eyes, and then they sprang. Round and round the room they struggled, he cursing, she shrieking, both fighting like madmen. She to slip the pin into his heart, he to strangle her with his great bare hands. Round and round and round and round the room, the earth trembled. The oilery shook. Barrels, buckets, tubs, vats, they went off rolling in all directions. Tubs of oil cast upon the floor, and my parents fought on, splashing, slipping, falling through the lukewarm pool. And the shadows of their figures wailed upon the walls. Rats swam around. Fat, black rats. Red-eyed rats washed out from their holes. Freaking and squeaking and squeaking and freaking, biting my parents on their ankles and legs. Rats! At last, my dear mother, with the patient resignation of her sex, pushed her pin deep into one of my father's eyes. He laughed. It was his glass eye. He brought a fistful of her hair, and again they sprang together. Blood. Blood spurted from my father's breast. My mother's needle had gone home. Then my poor father, feeling the hand of death upon him, leaped forward, grasped my dear mother in his arms, dragged her to the side of the boiling cauldron, and with one last tremendous effort, sprang in with her. In a moment, both had disappeared, and were adding their oil to that of the milkman, our washwoman, and the dentist next door. What a day. I decided not to sell these last contents of the cauldrons, but to keep them as a souvenir of my childhood. But one day I noticed that the oil was about to turn rancid, and I happened to be out of lard. So in whom do you think I had to fry my potatoes?